Coming up on Arirang News, South Korea sees a notable decline in new cases of COVID-19, but not in deaths from the disease. The death toll to date now topping 1,000. South Korea dispatches a military unit to the Strait of Hormuz after Iran seized a South Korean oil tanker for allegedly polluting. Officials aren't saying any more about the unit's mission. And analysts are forecasting South Korea's semiconductor industry to do better than ever this year, topping $100 billion in exports. It's 5 o'clock p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. There was a significant drop in the number of new COVID-19 cases over the past 24 hours. The number of deaths occurring, though, is as high as ever. The death toll to date has now surpassed 1,000. Han Sung-woo reports.
With 26 more deaths reported Tuesday, COVID-19 has killed more than 1,000 people in South Korea. Officials have confirmed 715 new cases, returning to the triple digits after over 1,000 cases the previous day. 672 of the new infections were locally transmitted. Of them, Seoul, Incheon, and Gyeonggi-do province accounted for over 450. Cluster infections at nursing homes continue to add to the caseload, most of them affecting people in their 70s and over. More than 1,000 patients have been linked to the recent mass outbreak at the Dongbu Detention Center in Seoul. During a briefing Tuesday, Prime Minister Cheonghae acknowledged the government's sloppy response to that cluster infection and urged the Ministry of Justice to spare no effort containing the spread.
We urge the Ministry of Justice to work closely with the health authorities to take all-out emergency efforts until the situation stabilizes. A thorough inspection should happen at all correctional facilities to check for any blind spots.
According to the Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency, the past week has seen a daily average of almost 900 infections. The number of critically ill patients has increased by 35 to 386, and the overall caseload is closing in on 65,000. Han Sung-woo, Arirang News.
President Moon Jae-in says COVID-19 vaccinations could start in South Korea as soon as next month. Speaking at the first cabinet meeting of the new year on Tuesday, he said South Korea is passing the peak of the third wave, and from February, the country will be in a better position to fight the virus thanks to vaccines and treatments.
식약처의 허가 과정을 거쳐 이르면 다음 달부터 접종을 시작할 수 있습니다. 국산 치료제 개발도 조건부 사용 승인을 신청하는 등 가시권에 들어섰습니다. 빠른 일상 회복이 새해의 가장 큰 선물이 될 수 있도록 정부는 최선을 다하겠습니다.
President Moon said the country will not lower its guard, stressing the need to stabilize people's livelihoods. He said the government will support small businesses and the self-employed through another batch of emergency relief funds next week. President Moon added that South Korea's aim in 2021 is to achieve a swift economic recovery. North Korea, still claiming not to have a single case of the virus, has reportedly asked to get vaccines from Gov't, the global vaccine alliance formed to help lower-income countries. The Wall Street Journal cited sources Monday as saying that the North has also been in touch with several European embassies in Pyongyang about securing vaccines. A spokesperson for Gov't declined to confirm the report, but said the group will give an update soon. Countries that have asked for vaccines, the organization added, will get them in the first half of the year. Last month, Gov't said it had received detailed vaccine requests from 86 out of the 93 eligible countries. A South Korean oil tanker was seized on Monday by Iran, allegedly for polluting the water, but the ship's operator denies that. Now South Korea has sent a military unit to the Strait of Hormuz, but officials aren't saying any more about the unit's mission. Kim Ji-yeon reports.
Seoul's defense ministry confirmed the military's anti-piracy unit arrived at the Strait of Hormuz, where Iran's Islamic Revolution Guards Corps has seized a South Korean-flagged oil tanker, the MT Hanguk Chemi. Iran has reportedly seized a vessel citing environmental and chemical pollution by the ship, an allegation the operator of the tanker denies. The Cheonghae Unit, made up of a 4,400-ton destroyer, a Lynx helicopter, and some 300 military personnel, plans to work with the Bahrain-based Combined Maritime Forces for the ship's early release. A total of 20 crew members were aboard the old tanker, including 5 South Korean nationals, 11 Myanmar nationals, 2 Indonesians, and 2 Vietnamese nationals.
The Cheonghae Unit arrived at the Strait of Hormuz on Tuesday morning Korea time. But for the safety of the Korean nationals, we will refrain from explaining further about the unit's forces at this time.
Foreign reports see Iran's recent move as part of efforts aimed at increasing Tehran's leverage so it can have international sanctions removed. The sanctions were reinstated following the U.S.'s unilateral withdrawal from the 2015 nuclear deal. Reuters reported that the U.S. State Department has called on Iran to immediately release the tanker, while the AP reported Iran has begun increasing its uranium enrichment to 20% purity, about which it had notified the International Atomic Energy Agency last week. 1/3 of global crude passes through the Strait of Hormuz. South Korea's oil tankers, which carry more than 70% of imported crude from oil-producing countries, pass through the strait some 900 times a year. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Despite the worldwide economic crisis and the U.S. tightening its sanctions on suppliers to the Chinese company Huawei, South Korea last year exported more semiconductors than ever. Analysts are saying this year is looking even better, with exports to top $100 billion. Ji-young reports.
South Korea's semiconductor exports are forecast to surpass $100 billion in 2021. That would be the second time in history for the figure to exceed the $100 billion mark. According to the data released by the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy on Tuesday, the country's exports of semiconductors in 2020 stood at $99.2 billion, up 5.6% compared to the previous year. Despite the sluggish global trade amid COVID-19, 2020 still saw South Korea's second highest ever semiconductor export figures.
Due to contact-free trends amid COVID-19, there was high investment in servers, and the demand for semiconductors that go into servers was also higher than expected.
As of December 2020, Samsung Electronics was ranked the world's #1 semiconductor firm in terms of market capitalization, beating Taiwan's TSMC. The market was shook up this year when the U.S. imposed restrictions on suppliers to Chinese tech giant Huawei, but an expert says this had little impact on South Korean semiconductors.
Sanctions on Huawei had little or no impact on country's exports because Huawei had already purchased all the semiconductors that it needed for this year before the restrictions took effect in September.
The global semiconductor industry is forecast to expand by up to 10% in 2021 compared to last year. The global use of semiconductors is to increase further in 2021, with the smartphone industry expected to use 2.4% more, the server industry expected to use 6% more, and the PC industry expected to use about 6% more semiconductors this year. South Korea's investment in semiconductor plants and equipment is also forecast to rise, and it is expected to reclaim the #1 spot in 2021 after falling to #3 in 2019 behind China and Taiwan. Ji-yeong, Arirang News.
Hyundai Motor Group is reportedly going to build a factory in Guangzhou, China for the production of fuel cell systems to power hydrogen cars. That's according to Yonhap News Agency, citing industry sources familiar with the matter, but this has not been confirmed by the company. Hyundai, the report says, recently got approval for the plan from South Korea's Trade Ministry and aims to finish the plant by the end of the year. Hyundai recently launched a brand for its fuel cell system called HTWO, with the goal of selling 700,000 hydrogen cars in 2030. Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that, I'm joined on the line by Mr. Daniel Yu, Global Strategist at Yuanta Securities. Mr. Yu, Happy New Year, and good to have you back on.
Happy New Year.
Well, during the holiday weekend, the Wall Street futures were pointing to a strong open on Monday, but instead it was a significant drop of 1.25% to 1.5%. Lockdowns in the UK and parts of the US getting tougher. Also, the election issues in the US. So what's the story in the global markets and here in Korea?
Yes, as you said, overall market declined quite sharply in U.S., somewhere between 1 to 1.5%, because of the political issues as well as the COVID-19 issues. If you look at the political issues, if you look at the Democrats and the Republican, the Georgia state is a key issue. That the Senate, if the Republican wins, then there will be a blue wave. And if actually the blue wave happens, then possibility of the tax rate hike that might result into negative earnings growth rate for some of the big companies in the large cap tech sector. So that has resulted into quite significant correction in the market. And also the COVID-19 incidents are quite sharply rising in U.S. as well as global overall. And the vaccine rollout seems to be in a slow pace, and that has resulted into kind of gloomy outlook for economic growth rate recoveries. So all that has resulted into the overall correction of U.S. market. But despite all that, if you look at the Korean market, it seems to be rising rapidly because of the expected earnings growth strongly coming from the major main sectors in the semiconductor, as well as the electric cars and also the alternative energy segment.
Well, the countries of OPEC ended their talks on Monday without a deal on production levels for next month. So oil prices are down a bit. The price of gold is back up, though, close to where it was in early November. What do you see happening with oil and with gold?
Yes, I think that these are two different issues because if you look at the oil side, as we know, the electric car portion of the market share out of the overall automobile industry is rising rapidly. And that results into a significant decline of the overall oil demand, while the continuation of the shale gas production, of course, there's some kind of correction in terms of the OPEC as well as the U.S. Supply of the oil, but the level is still relatively much higher compared to 5 years ago when shale was introduced. So all being said, the supply and demand side is making the oil price to remain quite low. I don't think the oil price can recover to the historical highs of about $70, $80 per barrel, which was about a few years ago, and also $150 about 10 years ago. I don't think that kind of prices can be reached. Rather, we are looking at oil price somewhere between $45 to $55 range bound because of the changes that you are seeing in the economic structure as well as the oil demand side. As for the gold, it's a totally different story because that is due to the continued liquidity injection through the M1 growth rate that you are seeing in U.S. as well as most of other countries. So continuation of increase in the currency supply that results into the demand for the alternative asset, including gold and silver and maybe the cryptocurrency, all rises quite significantly because of the liquidity injection. So we think that gold price will continue to show rising trend because it is a substitute for some of the cash at the current point in time.
Well, let's talk about some of those alternative assets, Bitcoin specifically, and the big rally. On Sunday, it broke through $34,000. It's now pulled back closer to $31,000. Of course, with Bitcoin, there's always the risk that the bottom falls out completely. But how long do you think this rally will last?
Well, this rally will last as long as the government continues to inject liquidity through the huge M1 growth rate. If you look at the numbers, you're looking at Korea, around 28% year-on-year growth rate of M1, which is the money supply, including the demand deposit. And if you look at that number for U.S., it is at 65%. So quite ridiculously high numbers. And if that happens, then if you're holding on to cash, then your value of cash declines quite sharply because of that injection of additional new liquidity. So therefore, demand for the alternative assets, cryptocurrencies and gold and silver rises quite rapidly. And given the fact that right now is the era of the fourth industrial revolutions, that the cryptocurrencies are widely used for the settlement through the internet. So if that's the case, then the demand will continue to rise. However, because the central bank's role is very important, you need central banks to allow this kind of currency to be traded widely. If the government and central banks start to prohibit the level of trade through the cryptocurrencies, then the demand will probably diminish quite significantly quickly. So therefore, it all depends on what government does. And right now, as far as government is concerned, they continue to inject liquidity, and also they are promoting continuously the online trade. So if that's the case, I think that the cryptocurrencies, the Bitcoin prices will continue to show rising trend over the next probably 1 to 2 years.
Got it. All right, Mr. Yu, we'll leave it there for today. Thanks so much for sharing your insights with us.
Thank you very much.
Now, in the middle of the Han River in Seoul, on the island of Nodeul, the park there will soon be illuminated by an art installation that looks like a giant moon. It's called Nodeul Under the Moonlight. It's made of 2 circular sheets of metal, 12 meters in diameter, with lights between them, that shine through 45,000 holes, arranged to depict the features of the moon. The installation will officially open on February 26th, the year's first full moon, according to the lunar calendar. That brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.